Today we will begin our school-wide nonfiction unit.
Here are some of the texts we will be exploring in the nonfiction unit. These are going to be the mentor texts that we use to really dive into nonfiction and learn more about its structure, its features, and how it's laid out.
So I bet you're wondering what's so great about nonfiction? Well, nonfiction is such an interesting genre because it allows us to explore virtually any topic that interests us. The possibilities are endless. Nonfiction covers many different topics and ideas. Today, we're going to study 3 different types of nonfiction: reference nonfiction, literary nonfiction, and finally, biographies. Reference nonfiction provides us with factual information about a topic. Literary nonfiction includes well-crafted narratives that blend facts with creative stories. And finally, biographies are the true stories of people's lives. We will read and explore all 3 types of nonfiction during our study. Let's take a look at the books in our unit and focus on a few in particular. While we take a closer look at each of the titles in our unit of study, I would like you to consider 2 things. One is, what is this text about? And the second question is, what do you already know about this subject or topic? Think about those 2 questions each time we look at a title. The first book in our lineup is Sneed B. Collard III's most fun book ever about lizards. This is honestly one of my favorites. Wait until we get into this one. Lots of humor. What do you think this one is about? Do you have any schema or background knowledge on this topic? Let's discuss. Our next text is called Women Explorers by Julie Cummins, illustrated by Cheryl Harness. What do you think this text is about? And what do you already potentially know about this subject? Let's discuss. The next text is called Henry's Freedom Box, a true story from the Underground Railroad by Ellen Levine and Kadir Nelson. What could this text be about? Do you know anything about the potential subject? Let's discuss. This text is called Arrowhawk. It's by Lola M. Schaefer, illustrated by Gabby Swiatkowska. What do you think this text could be about? Do you know anything about the potential subject? Let's discuss. A Warmer World, From Polar Bears to Butterflies, How Climate Change Affects Wildlife by Carolyn Arnold, illustrated by Jamie Hogan. What do you think this subject is about? Do you know anything about this potential topic? Let's discuss. And finally, I is for Idea, an inventions alphabet, written by Marcia Schonberg and illustrated by Candy Radzinski. What could this text be about? And do you know anything about the potential subject or topic? Let's discuss. Let's start our work today by exploring 3 of our texts. First, we'll start with Lizards by Sneed B. Collard. Then we'll discuss Arrowhawk. And finally, we'll talk about Women Explorers. Our first text is called Lizards by Sneed B. Collard, and it is an example of reference nonfiction. As I read the text today, I'd like you to make some noticings or observations about the features of reference nonfiction. This text has a table of contents. The first section is called So Many Lizards, So Little Information. And if you look over to the right, you'll notice it starts on page 7. If we continue on, you'll notice that Meet Joe Lizard is on page 8, and so on and so forth. So it looks like they're stars of the lizard world, eating like a lizard, staying off the menu, lizards hot and cold, falling in love, lizard troubles, lizard Olympians, lizards as pets, lizards the tail end. There's a glossary and an index. These are also two features you'll notice that most reference texts have. Let's head on over to the first section on page 7. So many lizards, so little information. Most people don't know very much about lizards. This seems odd when you consider that lizards, or saurians as they are sometimes called, are the most common reptiles on the planet. According to the German Herpetological Society's TIGR reptile database, scientists have described more than 5,000 species of lizards, more than all other reptiles combined. So why don't people know much about lizards? Maybe we don't bother learning about them because lizards can't win football games or help us with our homework. Maybe lizards are so common, we simply overlook them. But maybe, just maybe, we don't know about lizards because most of us have never had the chance to. Let's take a look at this caption below. Opposite. It's saying opposite because the picture is on the opposite page. I'll show you. Galapagos marine iguanas gather in large numbers to soak up some rays and conserve heat between feeding forays into the chilly ocean. Captions are useful because they give more details about pictures or diagrams. Photos are also another great feature that help us visualize what we're reading about. Your average Joe lizard is a western fence lizard, but his fans call him Blue Belly. He's about 3.5 inches, 9 centimeters long, not counting that handsome tail, and is about as typical as a lizard as you can get. Let's start with that scaly skin. Those scales make Joe look kind of cool, but they are mighty useful as well. They're made from keratin, the same stuff as your fingernails, and are tough enough to keep Joe from getting cut or scratched. They also help prevent Joe's body from losing moisture. This comes in handy seeing as how lizards live in some of the world's driest places, including Joe's home in Southern California. Joe's scaly skin blends in well with his surroundings. Camouflage is extremely popular in the lizard world. It helps lizards hide from enemies and sneak up on prey. Flip Joe Lizard over, though, and you'll discover why his fans call him Blue Belly. Isn't that the prettiest rib cage you've ever seen? Herpetologists, people who study reptiles and amphibians, think Joe Lizard flashes his bright blue colors to attract mates and warn intruders to stay out of his territory. The photo described in the text on the previous page is right next door. Can you see his blue belly? Speaking of territories, Joe's territory is where he hunts and goes a-courtin' for the female lizards. Joe always spends a lot of time there basking or lying around in the sun. Don't call him Lazy Joe, though. Joe is an ectotherm, an animal that can't make its own heat. He has to bask to raise his body temperature. Let's take a closer look at this photo, and let's read the caption too. California's best-known saurian, the western fence lizard, isn't just another pretty face. It has super survival traits, including the ability to live in many habitats. How cool is that? Going back to the next page where we saw that blue belly, let's take a look at the caption description here. A western fence lizard's bright blue siding helps males attract mates while warning other males to go get lost. Like most lizards, Joe eats just about anything he can stuff down his gullet. Insects, spiders, scorpions, centipedes, sometimes even other lizards. Of course, he's on the menu too, so he has to watch his scaly back. Snakes, cats, roadrunners, and other predators are always on the prowl for a lizard lunch. If Joe Lizard falls into the clutches of an enemy, he may resort to one of his coolest tricks, dropping his tail. With luck, this startles the predator and allows Joe to make a getaway. What about the tail? Joe will miss it, but he'll soon get busy growing a new one. If you think Joe's cool, just wait till you meet some of the... Before I go on, I love this text. It's so engaging. But I notice another text feature here. Does anyone know what this is called? That's right, it's a sidebar. Let's read on. Measuring a lizard. Scientists often don't include the tail when measuring a lizard's length. Instead, they measure only from the animal's snout to its anus or vent. This is called the snout vent length. Why do scientists leave off the tail length? One good reason is that lizards often lose their tails. Because of this, a tail length can give a false impression of how large the animal actually is. Tails also naturally come in many lengths from long to short. They just aren't useful indicators of how old or big or healthy an animal might be. Wow, did you notice that this book gives us so much cool information about lizards by using neat features? In this reference text, we were able to see photos, captions, sidebars, headings, a table of contents, and we even noticed that there was a glossary and an index too. Let's take another look into our next text. This one is called Arrowhawk. This text is an example of literary nonfiction, which gives information about a topic and is written as a beautifully crafted story. As I read the first few pages, I'll make some noticings about literary nonfiction. And let's begin. Hawk, young and strong, soared high above an open field. His large eyes searched the dried grasses below. A mouse raced in and out of the stubble. Hawk swooped down, snatched his prey, and carried it to a fence post. There, in the autumn sun, he tore and ate the mouse with his hooked beak. I can't help but notice how this nonfiction text really starts out sounding like a story. Let's read on. Twang! Out of nowhere, an arrow streaked through the air and pierced Hawk's upper thigh and tail. He screeched in pain. A flash of movement on his left signaled more danger. Stunned by the arrow, Hawk hesitated. Then he beat his wings, rose above his attacker, and flew into the distant trees. Hawk tried to perch, but the arrow snagged on small branches. He flew higher until he landed on an open limb in a red oak. Pain pulsed through his body. He pecked wildly at the arrow lodged in his thigh. Then he twisted his head and tried to push the arrow out of his tail. Blood seeped from the wounds, but the arrow did not budge. It was now a part of him. As with most stories, I noticed that there's a main character, and our main character here is Arrowhawk. I would consider this to be another feature of literary nonfiction. For 2 days and nights, Hawk rested high in the red oak. He only left his roost to scoop water from a nearby stream. Ignoring the pain, he cleaned his wounds by gently picking the dirt and bugs from the openings. He then preened himself by sliding his beak down the shaft of each feather and tucking it into place. Weary, he slept. By the third morning, Hawk was hungry. He spotted a black rat snake in the underbrush. He flapped his wings and glided down. Snatch! Hawk flew into a tree and held the snake against a limb. But when he bent down to eat, his beak kept bumping into the arrow. After 3 tries, Hawk finally pushed his head far enough to the side so he could eat his prey. Some noticings that crossed my mind while reading is Arrowhawk seems very strong. And I also know about what his prey is, now that I've read on. So the interesting part about literary nonfiction is it's written as a story. There's a main character, and it gives a lot of information. And in this text, I'm learning a lot about Arrowhawk. Did you notice these features too? Our final text is called Women Explorers. And this one, again, is by Julie Cummins. This is actually a collection of biographies. One feature of this text is that there is a table of contents. It looks as though there are different subjects in each section, which would be who each biography is about. There's also a section in the back of the text called Author's Note, which is very interesting, and a section that's called More Women Who Left Footprints on the Roads of Exploration. And finally, the back has a bibliography, which is very interesting because this is going to be where a lot of the information that the author gathered came from. Today, we're going to read about Lucy Evelyn Cheeseman. She lived from 1881 to 1969, and it looks like this text is going to be called A Bug Up Her Sleeve. We're going to go to page 18. Here she is, Lucy Evelyn Cheeseman, A Bug Up Her Sleeve. Spiders, snakes, and snails, oh my! Many mothers would throw up their hands in dismay if their daughters brought home such creepy crawlies. But Lucy Evelyn Cheeseman's childhood in an upper-class Edwardian home was far from typical. Her mother actually encouraged Lucy and her siblings to bring home all kinds of insects, wild things, and bugs to study, like the glowworms Evelyn collected to figure out what made them glow. In 1923, at the age of 42, she received an offer to join a zoological expedition to the South Pacific. Evelyn jumped at the chance to fulfill a dream, but when the group arrived in Tahiti, she set off on her own with only insect trays, a string hammock, and some basic necessities. Foolhardy? Maybe, but to the amazement of her family and friends back home, frail. Evelyn made 8 more solo expeditions to the South Seas over the next 30 years and proved to be tough enough to survive bouts of malaria and dengue fever, as well as deadly snakes, crocodiles, and giant spiders. This section really shows me how determined and courageous Evelyn is, and that she has a lot of perseverance. She went on expeditions alone. On one trek, she started to cross a clearing draped with webs of the huge, majestic-looking Nephilis spiders. Thinking she could brush through the webs, she pushed ahead, only to become totally entangled. I even tried to bite the threads, but that was useless. All around hung spiders of all ages, some near my face. I did not think them handsome anymore. Finally, she cut through the webs strand by strand with a nail file from her pocket. It took her several hours, and all the while the spiders sat waiting for their dinner, her. Sound like a scene from an Indiana Jones movie? After that frightening and very real encounter, Evelyn was never without a machete. This next page shows a picture of Evelyn, an illustration rather, of Evelyn with a bug net, it looks like. It looks like there are some people behind her just kind of admiring and watching her, and she has a walking stick. As shocking as it was for a middle-aged white woman to go exploring in primitive areas under primitive conditions, even more incredible was the fact that Evelyn often lived with cannibals. Why wasn't she in danger? Their friendly relationship was due to the fact that they were in the superior position of offering me instruction. Thus, a very special link was forged between us when they found that I did not attempt to press alien ideas on them. This section just reiterates to me that she's very brave. Can you imagine being entangled by a spider web and being at the point where a spider was going to eat you? That would be terrifying. But also, she's living amongst cannibals. Do you know what a cannibal is? I think she's very brave. However, their barbaric eating habits were alien to Evelyn, who preferred coconuts to human meat. Following one tribal skirmish after which the natives ate the dead, Evelyn asked one of her helpers if he could have eaten her if she had been killed. Of course, he replied. Eating someone had nothing to do with friendship, but with preventing the person's ghost from haunting them. The cannibals believed Evelyn had a strong spirit and that eating her when she died would keep her ghost away. Gulp. At only 5'2", wearing a bush suit with the shoes and stockings, this petite woman went into places where no white woman had ever been seen. She wrote about her fascinating adventures and stories of insect life in a dozen books, including some for children. Evelyn's once said, "Discomfort and danger are part of being a scientist." Neither one dampened Evelyn's enthusiasm for a life with bugs. I learned an awful lot about Lucy Evelyn Cheeseman. One thing that I want to point out about biographies is that they're almost always written in chronological order. In other words, they start, from a young age, and as her life develops, we learn more information. So this is very evident when it talks about her childhood here in this section. And then on the next page, what I notice is a date. Dates are very common text features in biographies, and there is a date here. There aren't very many, but there is. So a couple things that are important to note are the chronological order of events and how they occur, and then dates. Those are going to be very important features that you'll notice in biographies. Okay, now that we've read 3 different texts from our unit of study, or just some parts of them, we're going to write down what we notice about nonfiction. So if you can find this page in your school-wide notebook called What We Notice About Nonfiction, we're going to fill out this chart together. We'll take this time to jot down what we notice about reference text, literary nonfiction, and biographies, and then we'll discuss. Thanks for joining me today.